Packer, unfortunately was unable to attend. He has fallen ill. But so I say that just so that you forgive me if I'm not as fluid and as seamless as Dr. Packer would be. But I do want to welcome you, and I want to also recognize where we are here at the Forks, Treaty 1 territory and homeland of the Métis people, at a convergence of rivers of which there's both been life as well as tragedy, of where there has been human rights flourishing in terms of the community, as well as also grave human rights abuses. And I bring our attention to that so that we know where we are, and so that when we are speaking about the issues tonight, in terms of with the Rohingya population who is currently in Bangladesh, who are also often affected by that water, who are driven from their home, that we also remember that in terms of where we are and what we think of as home and our responsibilities that come to them as well. This happened to just come in the mail. In terms of what the Guardian needed, 1 million people live in the Rohingya refugee camps of Bangladesh. 6 years after they started to arrive, driven from their homes in Myanmar by the military, the prospects of returning are as distant as ever. The forgotten of Cox's Bazar. And I happened to just come, and it really brought me to something that Professor Charlie Carpenter, political scientist, had said, which is that we live in a world where there's a myriad of bad things. And these myriad of bad things often creates a competition of attention, a competition of who gets to be part of being seen as an issue, as something worthy of attention, worthy of resources, worthy of our limited time and care and ability to empathize. And this competition actually does a disservice to us all, because what ends up happening is that you end up having to fit into a particular trope, create a particular narrative, be a perfect quote-unquote victim, be a perfect quote-unquote perpetrator. Prove your worthiness of being cared about. And this inherently strips us of humanity as well as the people of whom we are speaking of to become simply an issue. Issues come and issues go. And so we are very grateful today to have 4 people who have not allowed the tide of attention to dissuade them from recognizing that there are people today in the Rohingya who have been stripped of their citizenship, stripped of their humanity. There's been attempts to strip them of dignity, but yet they are still here, resilient, resurgent, and organizing in a way that they can then have their human rights actualized. I want to start by just letting you know who is here. Also, does everyone know where the restrooms are? This is very important. Down the hall, to the left. They're gender neutral. Okay. So I was going to let you know who is here, and also just a brief understanding of the programming. As I mentioned before, Dr. John Packer from the Center for Human Rights Research and Education at the University of Ottawa is unfortunately ill. However, one of his star students, Bailey Peltier, is here to speak, to read his remarks. She is also here in her own good regard, though, and that's important. That will then be showing a short film from Medicine Sans Frontières, introduced by Michael Lawson, who is the advocacy advisor for Medicine Sans Frontières Canada. It will then be followed by Dr. Kauser Ahmed, who is the Executive Director of Conflict and Resolution Institute Canada, who, by the way, is recording this event, just so you know. It can be on the YouTube channel, so just know that is happening. And last but certainly not least, Senator Mary McPhedran will be wrapping up that portion of the information section I don't think that Senator Mary McFedrin needs any introduction. Fearless human rights advocate. Thank you very much for all of you for being here. We will then have another short film, it's an animated film, which will then open us up for informal discussion. We're a small group, guys. Like we know this, gender neutral guys. So please feel open and free in order to move forward if you'd like, in order to discuss and have the richness of the discussion. Thank you very much. Without further ado, Bailey.
Would you mind passing me the microphone?
Sure. Should turn it on. Here we go.
Hello. As was noted, I am delivering remarks for Professor John Packer. He writes in the first person. So when I say I, this is Professor John Packer. It is a pleasure and an honor to contribute to this evening's event in support of the long-suffering Rohingya people. I regret I am unable to be present in person to share some of my thoughts. Thank you nonetheless for this opportunity. Despite being unaware of the existence of the Rohingya people for the first half of my life, in fact, they have been suffering for my entire life. In 1992, as a United Nations Human Rights Officer, I was assigned to assist the first UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Burma, now Myanmar, and traveled in early 1993 to that country, including to Rakhine and Arakan State in the northeast, where I met with Rohingya who had been forcibly repatriated from Bangladesh following their mass exodus in 1992. That wasn't their first or last mass exodus. Already then, they had been subjected to decades of systematic oppression, systematic persecution, in effect stripped of their nationality and rendered stateless, and having already earned the moniker as the world's most persecuted minority. At the time, the majority of Rohingya still lived in their homeland and managed somehow to endure the manifold violations of their human rights and of systematic persecution. Today, perhaps 500,000 Rohingya remain in Rakhine and Arakan, while a great majority, 80% or more of Rohingya, have been forced to flee, dispersed throughout the world, many clinging to life in Bangladesh. Also today, in Rakhine, Arakan, the unrelenting persecution continues with new forms such as forced conscription and rapid deployment of young Rohingya men in effect to be used as human shields in the civil war between the Myanmar Armed Forces and the Arakan Army. The destruction of Rohingya as a group and of their homeland continues every day. Burma became independent as a state and admitted immediately to the United Nations on January 4th, 1948, including Rakhine, Arakan, and the whole population there, including the Rohingya. Whereafter, Burma proudly voted on the 10th of December, 1948, in favor of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the next day, on the 9th of December, 1948, the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which Burma subsequently signed in 1949 and ratified in 1956. Its persecution of Rohingya began not many years later. The catalog of human rights violations and other forms of oppression of the Rohingya has been abundantly reported and recorded for most of our lives, and increasingly, as technology permitted, by all sorts of actors and entities, not least by the United Nations over decades. Since that first report by the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar, which I drafted, the Genocide Convention has been repeatedly invoked, yet little action was taken. Only after the most recent mass exodus in August and September of 2017, which we witnessed live on our TVs, did eventually a little African country, the Gambia, have the temerity to bring a complaint against Myanmar by submitting an application to the International Court of Justice to commence action for breaches of the Genocide Convention. Canada heralded this and pledged support and followed with a short public statement that it would, without specification, intervene in the case. Over 4 years later, this is pretty much where things remain. For its part, Canada has contributed substantially, almost $2/3 of $1 billion, for mainly humanitarian assistance, meaning essentially writing large checks to the UN agencies, some humanitarian actors, and substantially to defray costs of the government of Bangladesh. The Rohingya continue to suffer, and the men in black robes in The Hague plod along. Worse, following the February 2022 coup d'etat in Burma, as the current military junta removed the legitimate authorities and began its reign of terror against the people of Myanmar. In The Hague, stunningly, the junta took the seats of the government of Myanmar and have been confirmed and granted every courtesy, privilege, and immunity in the now perverse charade of a legal theater about and without the Rohingya themselves having been given a voice or recognition. Canada has remained silent. In sum, the Rohingya crisis has been ongoing for most of our entire lives, and for all of theirs. The humanitarian emergency we talk about this evening is only the latest and now acute manifestation of an intergenerational oppression. There is little new and nothing we do not immediately recognize. What has always been striking to me is that the Rohingya are and never have been, the Rohingya have not and never have been a threat to anyone. Essentially a small agrarian and fisher folk, people seeking to live in peace in their small corner of the world, in peace with themselves and with their neighbors. Yet they have been denied this and instead targeted, dehumanized, and even demonized simply for existing. I am glad that in 2017, the Government of Canada responded clearly and substantially in their support, both materially and initially in pursuit of justice. The very few Rohingya who have been allowed to resettle in Canada, just around 1,000 or so, as I understand, have integrated quickly and well, even exemplary as individuals and as a small community despite many challenges. I know they are grateful to Canada, but I am disappointed that we, Canada, have not done much more in terms of what was needed, and especially what we could have done and could still do. In fact, we have not acted with vigor or even obviously in taking available steps at the International Court of Justice or otherwise, notably in terms of sanctions, countermeasures, and diplomatic pressure, much less creatively. Briefly, for a handful of months several years ago, we chaired a group of states on the Rohingya situation before our interests waned and ceased. Prime Minister Trudeau appointed a special envoy, Bob Rae, who eventually issued a well-received report, but few of his 17 recommendations have been implemented, including putting the Rohingya first in policy terms. And once Rae got a new appointment as ambassador to the UN, the special envoy role simply died. More concretely, to my knowledge, there has been hardly, if any at all, direct support for Rohingya leadership, either abroad or even within Canada, despite their remarkable progress and great merit. And there is still today no dedicated program or effort to facilitate the resettlement of Rohingya to Canada, much less something like a tailored program with support for Rohingya youth, together with higher education and training, where Canada could really lead, especially for Rohingya young women. Whether Canada's vaunted feminist foreign policy, neither the Rohingya nor I know. In conclusion, yes, the Rohingya crisis goes on, and the humanitarian emergency is real and urgent, and Canada's response is, well, modest. Indeed, it has recently been announced that the budget for Rohingya assistance will be cut. So what then remains? I believe Canada can do better, even with limited funds, and I know the Rohingya need and merit better. After this evening, I hope you will agree and help to ensure that the Government of Canada reconsiders its response and takes available steps to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. Michael?
Well, maybe I'll start from here. Since it appears that the film I was about to queue up has gone off, so I'll need to tap a password in there once I get started. So maybe I'll just introduce from here. So my name is Michael Lawson, as introduced before, from Doctors Without Borders and Médecins Sans Frontières. MSF will be probably the term I'll use the most in comments when I'm talking about our work. So just MSF's perspective on this crisis, which is a humanitarian emergency and an ongoing one, and not just located to Myanmar or Bangladesh, but is actually a regional crisis that takes in other countries as well, other places where Rohingya refugees have arrived and sought shelter. But of course, as a stateless population, this is incredibly difficult, and they continue to encounter abuse, exploitation, and persecution in many places where they go. From MSF's perspective, we've been providing emergency humanitarian medical care to Rohingya populations since 1992, first starting when an initial exodus of around 250,000 Rohingya, as mentioned in the opening remarks, crossed over from Rakhine State into Cox's Bazar. We also began operations in Rakhine State itself in Myanmar the following year in 1993. It is a very difficult place in which to operate, even for a humanitarian medical organization that prides itself on being able to work in all sorts of places. Myanmar is very difficult. One of the challenges of working in Myanmar is that it is very difficult for any humanitarian organization to work. You need travel authorizations, you need access, and this is sometimes you have it, sometimes it's taken away. It's very unpredictable. It's a very, very complicated environment in which to work. So at the moment, MSF is the primary provider of medical care within the Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. We are probably seeing the amount of care that we're providing is going up as we see more and more providers and responders and humanitarian organizations leaving, as we see a decline in funding for the humanitarian response in Cox's Bazar. We are also one of the primary medical care providers in Rakhine State itself for Rohingya populations and displaced Rohingya populations who are confined in camps. This, however, at the moment doesn't actually amount to very much. As you may be aware, since 2021 and the coup in Myanmar, it's been also very difficult to operate. There conflict within Rakhine State itself currently between non-state armed groups and the Myanmar armed forces has been increasing. It's exceedingly difficult for us to access any of our patients, and it was already difficult beforehand. But we do run mobile clinics, and over the past 3 months since the intensification of the conflict there, that has actually been almost impossible to do. We also run medical programs in Malaysia, which are primarily focused on Rohingya refugees who, again, are undocumented arrivals. Malaysia has not signed the Refugee Convention. Again, the Rohingya are stateless refugees. Access to care is exceedingly difficult. And so we do provide clinics and care, and we work in some of the migration detention centers, which in Malaysia are not particularly nice places. Just to preface the video we're about to see, so over the past, since 2017, the exodus that was mentioned by Bailey in the opening remarks, we have actually seen a deterioration of the humanitarian response. We are seeing a deterioration in the circumstances in which Rohingya living in the camps in Cox's Bazar are forced to live. This is a result of many things. Obstacles to movement, people can't freely move through the camp, and among other things, a significant increase in violence, violence within the camps. You have a group of about, estimate now, more than 1 million, probably closer to 1.2 million Rohingya refugees living in a very small space. They are not allowed to work. They are not allowed to leave the camp. They depend almost entirely on humanitarian assistance for their survival. And as that humanitarian assistance begins to ebb away, and as violence within the camp increases, we're just seeing a more and more difficult situation for the people who live there. So the video that I'm going to show was recently made by an MSF video team in Cox's Bazar. The focus is on just some of the younger people in the camp who are facing a reality where they have very few options and facing a number of different challenges when it comes to accessing care, pursuing their life, being able to live in any kind of health and wellness. So without further ado, I'll cue that up. And I'll leave that here.
Yes. Give it to go.
I think that's all. All right, so this film is called Out of Fear, and it should be up. Whoops. Sorry, that's not the right.
এখান থেকে এই বেড়াটা পুড়িয়ে এই গরম বেড়াটা পুড়ে আমার বাইক হয়ে আছে এইখানে একটু ওই জায়গাতে বসে দুনিয়া দৌড়ি দুনিয়া মুক্ত খাইয়ে নেয়
Babbaste faggolano barbarene, ma mi sarebbero babbasi. Babbas detano moneta con non vedi quello che dice, ma c'era tu hai una delle nane tra te che dici, per questo la ina ma tu non la combavari. Combavari e to con mane, nel che to con mane, buona torbo asceshi. Ma sai che ci dirà, io ya se mi made mi da un to doriere la madre ma non combavari pure Kurizargo era asira to kamada de nakon bala hoga chaide eta ariana agora lutu Allah hade alpa gangoro to bashi dargo on jolraro ta kalli da ko bisana ki gawadi ronna niyayiri nala alladda je sajama sha kanyani kodo defensive into arahatta to de musto dorigi kanyano dorigi yana besiri jega bai ba bere gi du ita hai to hambalti la ida ranu mori ida hamu bujiru mori
সাড়ে তো গলে না
উত্তমদেরই এরা অবস্থা কিন্তু বেশি বুঝে যেত আর বেশি নেবে না আর তো সাথে কি তারা কি দরদ তো দিয়ে সাথে কি কারণ সাথে কারণ মনে মনে কি আগামী ছেলে তো এতো আমাদের মানে তো তোমার ফরমাশন মরি এম ধরে কিসে বাবু দিতে কিসে আমার মাথা কি হতে না আমার মাথা কথা নেই কুড়িয়ের উদ্যান দিতে কুড়ি কোয়া করি না কলেজ মানে এড়ে মানে দলা বেশি কোয়া বাসা হয়ে
তো দরিয়া বেশি রকম কিংবা খালো তো দর জিন্দিগি জীবন হারাই দিয়ে আর বাংলাদেশ তার সাথে 2005 মাঝে আর যত গড়বাড়ি ফুরা দিয়ে গেল আর আর তখন খুশি আসছিল গড়বাড়ি যত ফুরা দিয়ে গেল গরু সব যত হারিয়ে গেল 그 후원체인저 또 오는 마데 보라디벨레 마랑 마야 만들어 또 래퍼를 또이한 수주 우리는 하리는 বাংলাদেশের মধ্যে ছিল আমরা এখন মনে করো আমরা আসছি আগে 6 বছর পারে গিয়ে এলারে ফার্স্ট ইয়ার এটা হলো সুবিধা একজন ওর একজন টাকা ওর তো এটা হলো সুন্দর করে হলো থাকি তারিখ দেন কষ্ট বিষ্ট করে হন্ডলে মেহনত করে দিন হারাইতে বর্মত আগে এটা এখন তো ক্যাম্পতে গিয়ে ক্যাম্প মাঝে দর জিন্দগি করে হলো খুশি আছি জিন্দগি নাই পেরেশানি চলিতে Tuala Hurayo at the Chongeras Dora Loyana Quay Buzuriana Barajana Barajo Azaguri Vati in Tami Gilatu Quarry Hundula Nisiasi Nojo and Level and Nisiasi Bunya Dora River. Ratia Punaga Yanta Eleanor on the Mazor Arabolo, even Mother of the
When you talk with Rohingya refugees now, almost all of them say that their number one concern in the camps is violence, is the security situation. Armed groups and criminal gangs have become rampant in the camps, and the level of violence there is getting worse all the time. Rohingya are being killed, sexually assaulted, kidnapped, tortured. They describe living in an environment of pervasive fear. Kids will say that they're too scared to go to school. Some refugees will say they're too scared to even use the latrines. The level of violence varies camp by camp, but its impact is felt everywhere and by really everyone who you talk to.
Around 1 million Rohingya people are currently living in Bangladesh, most of them living in a network of camps located south of the city of Cox's Bazar. Altogether, these camps make up for the largest refugee camp in the world. Since 1978 and the military operation Dragon King, Rohingya people have been entrapped in a cycle of campaigns of violence in Myanmar, of displacement to Bangladesh to flee this violence, and of repatriation to Myanmar. In 1982, Myanmar passed the Citizenship Act, which basically deprived Rohingya of their citizenship and essentially made them stateless people. In 2017, following a campaign of extreme violence in Myanmar, Rohingya people sought refuge in Bangladesh in the district of Cox's Bazar.
We've seen over the past year or two, Bangladesh authorities really ramping up restrictions on the Rohingya refugees, on their ability to work, to study, to move freely. Authorities have closed community-led schools. They've shut down and in some cases demolished shops and markets. They've imposed new restrictions for traveling just within the camps at checkpoints for refugees who are trying to get from camp to camp, not even to leave the camp entirely. Rohingya are not allowed to leave the camps to work. They have extremely limited opportunities to work within the camps. So the armed groups and criminal gangs have been able to take root because it provides an opportunity to work and make money, essentially. They're operating and funding themselves through these illicit economies, drug smuggling, human trafficking, extortion. These groups are primarily recruiting young men, sometimes even boys, and they go to them and they tell them, we can give you money, we can give you guns, we can give you power. And those promises really hold appeal for people who feel like they have no other options, for people who are struggling to survive.
We've been receiving in our hospitals an increased number of patients with violence-related wounds, including children, hit by stray bullets. In such a context, there are limited solutions for Rohingya people. Some try to leave Bangladesh and to take the sea to reach Malaysia or other regional countries. Others are considering that it's no longer possible to remain in Rohingya camps and are trying to head back to Myanmar.
Es que muchas veces mi madre la tengo de ya la verdad me decía la mamá que no आणि मी ज्या तंगोर माया बंदूर लगते मामा सायरा मिलिशिया गिगे मेंशन शहा दोरे के राय दोरे उठे नो बिका आणि कोरोना वायरस दे आला दत मान नो दे बमारे डाने बेग दिगला बुडार का दी पाचा दिगला पाचा दिगला दे आना मानिश खुद मोरी बियोर हाय नवाल बिन मारे वाशे ताते बमारे के उठे नो टाइम होते 3-4 दिन में वाशे के बुटा वाजले असे बियो दिगला कोण मन आरा चिंता भावना बुद्धी जगा वनावर वनावर हवा का इता राजमान बुरुत तुले वर्षा देशा मोजालो बुरो मारे भाषा देते ना खबर का म्हणजे माने सेवा दहाना भात तारी वो मोरी गेट भरले हम आरा चिंता करू गरमा काय चालले एरिजोना परे बरमा दुबा मालिशा हार दोरी दोरी वरे हाजिरा दोरी बाकी शरीरे दरमेला जिंदगी बाबा परे राखना
Boston Char is this remote flood-prone island in the middle of the Bay of Bengal, which Bangladesh authorities have attempted to build up into a site to house Rohingya refugees. They started moving Rohingya to the island in December 2020. So far, about 30,000 Rohingya have been moved. Many of them want to return to the camps on the mainland and haven't been allowed to. Hundreds have tried to flee.
අවුරුදු මාසෙන් තුල්ලා වැඩිලා පොලිසිය අවුරුදු තරම් කල් කරයි ඉක්තිය ඉත කල් කරලා සීමාන සාර කතා හොයය අහත අවන්න කිසු බුද්ධි කිසුනෝ බුද්ධි ආර කතයි तो आज तो नगर में फोरारा सुबुरे जिनसे का हम किया बोल की हो रहा है कि आज नगर आ रहा है तो मां बाबा ने तो अच्छा नहीं तो डर फाइनल आई डर डर बोले दिए बात चिंता बोले दिए वर्षा तिरिशा मरे जाए तो इतना तो ये होता है तो हमका कुल्ला मार मार लोग नगर बाब लोग नगर आज और बाहर आने हाँ बर्मन ना गए वो यार बर्मन देश में आने तो बीच खर्च चला यार है बस तुम ना रखता खाने कर दो मुझे आओ दिन आओ गए आखिर पेट में तो आप मेरे रात एक दूसरे का यार सारा कुछ मुड़ा सारा कदम मुड़ा लग गया मारो पूरी ना ये बुखार हाँ यार मेरा कैसा आप बदल गए सारा बाबा
আসলে ক্যাম্পের পরিস্থিতি এখন বর্তমান যেটা পরিস্থিতি ওখানে গ্রুপিং হওয়ার কারণে মানে বাচ্চারা তো কমফোর্টেবলি কোনো জায়গায় খেলা বা ওদের তো এমনিতে জায়গার সংকট যার কারণে হচ্ছে তারা খেলাধুলার জায়গাটা পাচ্ছে না ওখানে আর হচ্ছে সবসময় তারা এখন একটা আতঙ্কের মধ্যে এটা সবাই জানে যে সেজন্য তাদের মা বাবারা দেখা যায় যে বাচ্চাদের বের হলে তারা দিচ্ছে না there is pediatric hospital, child hospital. That's why we visit the mother with a lot of problem. আমরা এখানে মূলত হচ্ছে বিভিন্ন সাইকিয়াট্রিক পেশেন্ট আমরা ডিল করি তার মধ্যে হচ্ছে আমরা ডিপ্রেসিভ পেশেন্ট ডিল করি তারপর হচ্ছে আমরা সাইকোসিস পেশেন্ট ডিল করি ডিপ্রেশন এনজাইটি রিলেটেড ডিডি পোস্টপার্টাম ডিপ্রেশন রিলেটেড আমরা পেশেন্ট এখানে ডিল করি অল কাইন্ড অফ পেশেন্ট আমরা এখানে ডিল করি মেন্টাল হেলথ পেশেন্ট বর্তমান হচ্ছে যে বিষয়গুলো ইম্প্যাক্ট ফেলতেছে মানে ক্যাম্পের কন্ডিশনের উপর ভিত্তি করে মানে মেন্টাল হেলথে যে বিষয়টা পাল্টাতে ইম্প্যাক্ট ফেলছে সেটা হচ্ছে ফার্স্ট যেটা বলতে হয় এটা হচ্ছে ভায়োলেন্সের কারণে বিভিন্ন ধরনের ভায়োলেন্সের কারণে ইফেক্টটা পড়তেছে মেন্টাল হেলথে। তারপর হচ্ছে বিভিন্ন ধরনের ফিনান্সিয়াল ইস্যুর কারণে ইফেক্ট পড়তেছে। যেমন আমি কয়েকটা ইনসিডেন্টের কথা যদি বলি, আমাদের কিছু পেশেন্ট ছিল আপনার খুবই শারীরিক কন্ডিশন খুব খারাপ, হসপিটালে অবশ্যই এসে এখন এই মুহূর্তটাই হচ্ছে দরকার ভর্তি হওয়া, মানে রাতে তার শরীরটা খুব খারাপ, কিন্তু সে ভয় হচ্ছে বাসা থেকে বের করতে পারতেছে না, কারণ সে বের হলে হয়তো তাকে কেউ গুলি মেরে দিবে বা তাকে কেউ আঘাত করবে, যেহেতু সবসময় রাতের বেলা বা দিনের বেলা তারা হচ্ছে ওখানে ঘোরাঘুরি করে। তো সে কারণে সে বাচ্চা নিয়ে এমন পরিস্থিতি ছিল, সে যখন সকালবেলা হতে হতে দেখা গেছে বাচ্চাটা খুব খারাপ হয়ে গেছে, হসপিটালে আসতে আসতে বাচ্চাটা মারা গেছে এবং মাটা তখন মনে করেন যে
এখন বই সব উগা পাইছে যদিও উগা পাইছে ওই তো গেলে দেখা করিব এবার মধ্যে বইয়ে না একটা না গিয়া বলে আরাম হয়ে যাবে, এখন তো দেখা লাগিব বেশি নসিব কোন বিষয় দেবে, ঠিক আছে না? যখন একটা মা ডেলিভারিতে আসে তখন বিভিন্ন কমপ্লিকেশন নিয়ে একটা মা আসে, নর্মাল পেশেন্টরা আসে নর্মাল ডেলিভারির জন্য, কিন্তু অনেক মা আসে যারা কমপ্লিকেটেড, ওরা অনেকেই এমন সময় আসে যে একেবারে লাস্ট পর্যায়ে ডেলিভারিতে আসে, এমন লাস্ট পর্যায়ে যে খুব ব্লিডিং হচ্ছে, আবার তার প্রেশার একেবারে কমে গেছে, মোটামুটি শকের দিকেই অনেক পেশেন্টরা আসে। বড়টাই কোনো অসুবিধা হলে নেই। আসলে হয় কি ক্যাম্পের পরটা হচ্ছে আপনার সন্ধ্যার পর থেকে ওদেরকে বেরোতে দেয় না, মানে ক্যাম্প সিচুয়েশনের কারণে অনেক সময় ফাইট হয়, গোলাগুলি হয়, একটা ব্যাপার ওরা চাইলেও রাতে যে একটা কেয়ার নেবে এজন্য আসতে পারে না। তারপর আমরা যে পেশেন্ট গুলা রিসিভ করি অনেকগুলা ইন্টিমেট পার্টনার ভায়োলেন্স, যেমন হাজবেন্ড ওকে মারে, ফিজিক্যালি ভায়োলেন্স করে, আবার হচ্ছে অনেকগুলা রেপ কেস আছে যেগুলা আননোন পারসন দ্বারা হয়, ইভেন হাজবেন্ড নিজেও এটা শামিল হয়। আবার এটা এটা হচ্ছে এখন আমরা করি মানে বাচ্চার যখন ডেলিভারি হয়ে যায় তারপরে হচ্ছে ওদের যে স্মার্ট কার্ড থাকে একটা, মা এবং বাবা এরা দুজনের স্মার্ট কার্ড গুলো আমাদেরকে দেয়, যদি বাবার স্মার্ট কার্ড আনতে না পারে তাহলে এখনো পর্যন্ত ওরকম কোনো নির্দেশ নাই যে তুলতে পারবো কিনা, যদি তুলতে না পারে তাহলে ওরা আর এটার জন্য খাবার দাবার কিছু পায় না, রেশন কার্ড পায় না, এটা নিয়ে খুব প্রবলেম ফেস করে হচ্ছে ওই হাজবেন্ডরা অনেক সময় চলে যায়, মানে অনেক জায়গায় চলে যায়, যার কারণে মারা না ওনার স্মার্ট কার্ড পায় না কিছু, তখন হচ্ছে ও চাইলেও বাচ্চাটাকে আর তুলতে পারতেছে না।
Come situazioni poi di alla la diventa canale di invece di attrarsi. Infatti, quindi quella che va a studiare la cano è convenire ব্যাপারে বলতে বললে বাচ্চা এবার বাপ লাগিব অনেক টাকা মাঝে বাচ্চা ছুটি তাই বাচ্চা এবার বাপ কেউ দায়ী ওই বাচ্চা এবার বাপ না থাকলে কয়বার রাজ্যে দিয়ে না ভাই কয়বার রাতের পত্র নভার সময় শুয়ে কয়বার টাকা তোলা করে টাকা কিভাবে তুলি নিয়ে বসালেই বা আর টাকা তুলি বলে আইন কোশিশ করে চাই, তারা যদি খুশির ভাবে যদি তুলি না ধৈর্য দিলে আইন করুন বইটা কিন্তু কি ব্যাপার ধৈর্য দিন আর মু তো দিন দিন দৌড় যাবো বই দৌড়ের জন্য ঘরের টাকা গেল অনেক সাহার বাড়ালে বিভিন্ন সমস্যা হলি আমাদের তারা চাই স্কুলে ঘরে পাঠাতে চাই ফাইন্ডারে বালা করে বলা খুশি করে বেলা দৌড় বেলা ইয়ান খুশি চান করতে চাই তো মানে কি ভালো হইলে মাদ্রাসা যাইলে স্কুল ভরি ফেললে পাল্লা মোমে জুম খেলা বালা Ajaran boleh. Yang nijuk khusus dulu saya. Allah hayat nomor besar kile. Kira habis nggak ada habis. Ini apa sih ini? Tema bang mereka tuh habis foto berarti ini rati ini. Kalau orang sini ini ada lawa kasan, nata kasan. Ya kore kira habis, bulan habis. Trabalho dia inteiro é rota de Suzana Bizigio, que é na nova. E era por isso também, amba. Ina saga sabi, já foram de deles.
Eso sí, yo me diría que no sé, ¿no? When we were in Myanmar, we get a formal education, even though we were not allowed from the higher education. The systems which is running around the camp is not the systematically what we have planned. Our students are deprived in basic educations and higher educations. So even our students and our youngs are not attached in our cultures and our national cultures because they are not getting quality and formal education. We want to introduce our generations, our children to our national culture, and we want to let them know what is human right, what is justice, what is modern world. So we want to see our generation as our future. Sometimes we are trying to make videos regarding our culture, regarding our cultural foods, our historical texts, and we show them. We face so many challenges, so many difficulties. We still never give up.
We fear that the children and youth living in the camps are becoming a lost generation without access to formal and accredited education or adequate livelihood opportunities. Their progression did seem quite bleak. The only education that NGOs together have been able to provide, and we also have subsequently provided, are temporary learning centers. However, the learning centers are not necessarily formally recognized schools. Only about 26% of adolescents aged between 15 and 18 have been getting any sort of education or any learning experience in the camps. And number of girls accessed is even less than the boys. So that's a huge matter of concern. We are also very concerned about how this results in the parents becoming extremely worried for their children. This results in child labor. This also results in a lot of child marriage increase because they just marry off the daughters in the hopes that they would live a better life. And that in itself also brings in its own set of problems. Definitely there is a need for protecting them from trafficking, from drug abuse, from being subjected to different sorts of violence in the camps.
Kebermat dalam boleh sebermat jin dalam sekitar mani kapela mesti kita dalam kelas ini kebermat dalam kita boleh cari ada Asia pasal dulu ini ada dengan kebermat yang membuat saya kan boleh cari ada kebermat pun dari ada tunggal sih di sini karena itu lah ada dari dua orang di usus jerman ada orang Cina আলাদা সে আমি জেলে ছিলাম, জেলের কার্ড যাতে মানে কয়েক বছর জেল মারছি, জেলে কয় মাস ছিল, জেলে জেল থেকে কখন বের হয়েছে, কোন মাস কোন তারিখে জেল মারছে, এটা আমি লিখে দিচ্ছি। যাইরা জিও বানাই আর মারা জিও মারি, জিও করে আর হতায় বাসায় না বুঝি এবং আর ইনকাম তো মতো না পাই, ইনকাম থেকে না পাই, গা তো শুকলো ব্যায়াম রয়ে হানা বাইরে চলা বাইরে বেশি কষ্ট পাই। জিও হারাছে বাদে জিও পুরা এরে আনাতে মঙ্গল ইনস্টাগ্রামের মঙ্গল মানে আমি দিয়ে আর খারাপ না আর একটু করতো নাই তো আর কাছে আইরে kan arbai bade apun bai ma dua dio ba apun bai pahu ko de pray 10 মাস ধরে কোন খবর নাই কি টারিনা কি মালয়েশিয়া কি বর্মা রে নুন যেও জায়গা মধ্যে যে আমি জানি কেন নাই হামদগিরি তো হে নগরী লগি সিস্টেম খবর নাই কোন খবর
The government of Bangladesh made a significant effort in welcoming Rohingya people, including transforming the hills in a network of camps and setting up the necessary infrastructure.
The Bangladesh authorities have a responsibility to protect the Rohingya. Certainly, Myanmar has the main responsibility for the situation of the Rohingya, but Bangladesh, like any country, has an international obligation to protect all people that are in its jurisdiction, including refugees. In this case, that means ensuring that they have basic rights, access to justice, and not forcing them back to a country where they would be at serious risk.
As of September 2023, only 30% of the humanitarian funding required for basic services to Rohingya people is funded. The decrease in the level of the humanitarian funding has dire consequences for Rohingya. Since the start of 2023, the food ration distributed to Rohingya has decreased by 40%. In a situation where access to basic services for Rohingya people overwhelmingly depend on humanitarian assistance, there needs to be a commitment by donor countries and humanitarian actors so that a minimal suitable level of services is maintained. And this question of survival is the question of whether a space exists or not in the Rohingya camps for Rohingyas to organize socially, culturally, politically. Obviously, it's not for humanitarian actors to organize that space, but I think there is a role for humanitarian actors to ensure that conditions for the space to exist are there and are maintained. And of course, access to education fits into that. But I think more largely, the question of humanitarian assistance and humanitarian funding fits into that through the perspective it is allowing Rohingya people to have or not to have.
যারা অনেক দেশন নয় আর ছিলাম বর্মা এই আরা তো জাগো করিব অনেক দিনের দিন আর দাগা জমিন আছে ঘর বাড়ি আছে এই তোমারা তো আরা যদি মরি যায় যদি পয়েন্টে যাইলে পরিচয় হবান এবাবতে ডর পয়েন্ট জিন আছে বুদ্ধি জুমই উন্নরে পরিচয় আমরা
ভাই আমার একবার আগে দিয়ে যাবো চেষ্টা করবো মানে যে তোমার মারি দিলে তাকে না মা মারি দিলে বাপ মারি দিলে
মানে মেলা লেখার বর্মা বর্মা নিজে জন্ম বইতে শুরু তুলে দেশি আনালা অভাব খেতে পড়বো বালা যদি হলে শান্তি বাবু যদি গোপন যদি শান্তি ভাত দেয় হলে আড়াই যেতে চাই যার কিছু যদি অশান্তি চলক দেবে যে অশান্তি তাকে দেয় হলে আড়াই যেতে না চাই শান্তিলে যাইতে চাই অশান্তিলে যাইতে না চাই
So maybe I'll just mention quickly before Kozer speaks is that just some of the things that were mentioned in that video. So the indicators we have just through medical clinics and through medical activities is, well, they're all going in the wrong direction. So there was a mention of food rations. So we do see increased levels of malnutrition, specifically for children under the age of 5, increasing at our clinics. We are seeing a significant increase in sexual and gender-based violence, because we do also provide sexual and reproductive health care in different clinics in the camp, and we've seen quite a significant increase of that just in the last 2 years. We are seeing increases in maternal mortality. That was alluded to also in the film, people having difficulty. People aren't presenting for care until it's far too late. It's too dangerous for them to travel. And paired with that, too dangerous to travel, and then the number of clinics that are close to where they live within the camps, those clinics are either disappearing or just don't have the level of services that are required. So people aren't actually able to get to that level of care. And as you might imagine, the mental health needs are immense, and also are increasing in any number of other indicators. But just purely on our medical data in the various clinics that we run within, and this is just within Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, all those indicators are going up and going in the wrong direction. One last thing to mention is just the prevalence of different diseases. Particularly scabies is probably a very good example. Scabies is incredibly widespread in the camps in Cox's Bazar. It's also something that you can't address simply through medical care. You also need living conditions that are amenable to preventing the spread of scabies. It's a skin infection. So if you're living in sort of poor hygienic conditions, and water and sanitation facilities is another indicator of where the humanitarian response is diminishing. Just the level of access to drinking water, but water for cleaning, clean water is also reduced depending on where you are in the camp. And scabies is almost at a shocking level. Like it's almost 1 in 2 people in the camp have had scabies in the last 2 years. In some of the sub camps, there's actually up to 70%. And you're not like, there has been a mass drug administration to try and address that, but that's not going to solve anything as long as people are living in very confined spaces and don't have anywhere to go. So that's just some of the other pieces that came out a little bit in that video. And I know, Kasu, you're going to talk a bit about the humanitarian situation. So, or it stays on.
It's quite dark. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to our discussion on Rohingya crisis. In the beginning, I would like to appreciate for the invitation extended to me, and especially when it is an event organized or prepared by MSF. I have deep gratitude to these folks because they are on the ground since 1992. And as some of you might know that I come from that area, and I was a very young officer in the army when I was visiting at this this area when the second largest exodus actually were happening. Around 250,000 of them started taking shelter between 1901 and 93. So deep gratitude to MSF for your excellent work. In 2017, I co-founded the research think tank Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, under which banner I still work. And right after this organization came into existence, actually just 3 months before the final exodus took place from Rakhine State, earlier also known as Arakan. So at that time, approximately 750,000 of them took shelter. So over the past 5-6 years, the camp population has been increased to nearly 1.2 million. And if you compare to any of the Canadian cities and provinces, you might not want to believe what is the number looks like. 34 camps in total throughout the area. Bangladesh government has allowed people, Rohingyas, to live and sort of arrange their infrastructure. I visited the camps, 5 camps between 2018 and 19 in 2 of my trips, because at that time we were writing our first book on the crisis. And I'm happy to note that, let you know that our 3rd book is in press, being published by Springer Nature. It's a primary research done by Dhaka University. And you will, if you follow us, you will find the research findings. So my personal involvement in this conflict, because I come from that area, and I wanted to understand how this crisis can actually end. Given the history of this conflict, as again some of you might know, that Rohingya exodus is nothing new in that particular area. And there are various contestation with regards to their identity, especially the state of Myanmar, also known as Burma, during the British colonial period till 1998, 88. So at that time, the amount of people took shelter in Bangladesh. So there were a bit of back and forth. People came, they again went back. Even after 90s, early 90s exodus, a good amount of Rohingyas went back. But things started deteriorating after 2011 or 12, our research shows. And especially if you remember, at that time, Burma was transitioning to democracy under the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi, the way you pronounce. And again, I'm not going into all these details today because of the time, but you are possibly aware how it actually unfolded, the process of democratization in Myanmar. It didn't go well, that I can tell you. In 2021, Myanmar went back to military rule as of today. And today I'm going to give you some update, because many of you might not follow this conflict, because we have even bigger conflicts in our discussions today in Ukraine and in Palestine. So after that period, what is happening now, I'm referring to 17 and 2023, humanitarian aspects, of course, gets priority, the basic human needs and how these are being met, including food and other stuffs, because of the sheer number of people. And just folks, try to understand that over 750,000 people arrived in a span of 7 to 10 days. And if you are not there, it is so difficult to imagine, because MSF, I'm sure my friend would agree with me, that they were also not ready at that time to deal with such a huge number of people. So it was the local people, those who actually, and Bangladesh government and individuals actually supported these 400, 500, 600,000 people for months. There was no international agencies there, nothing. UNHCR and other organizations were typically there since early 90s with small offices. They're dealing with some old camps of 5, 10,000, 15,000 people. But the sheer number when they descended in this area, it was really a catastrophe. The way we use the word catastrophe, so it's absolutely like that. So since then, things have changed. A lot of humanitarian actors went in, and in 2018, in April, I was there. I saw around 95 NGOs, both national and international, were working. And in 2019, last time I went there, after that I couldn't, it was over 145 NGOs were in place. And it's a mix of national and international, and they're doing wonderful work. So the situation is really very complicated, least to say. And both from Bangladesh perspective and from the international perspective, because there is no repatriation in sight, nothing. And you might also be aware that camp population increases, because we are talking about human being. We have all these regular things going on in the camp. So to the best of my knowledge, camp population has increased over 100,000 by now, since August 2017, when the last exodus took place. So how to deal with this sheer volume of people, it itself is a challenge, both for the humanitarian actors as well as the state itself. With regards to host country, I technically disagree with the comments of UNHCR representative. Bangladesh is not a signatory of 1951 Refugee Convention, is not. And it is also not a signatory of 1967 Rome Statute. So you might say that, what does it mean? It means that Bangladesh might say that we are technically not responsible and we want them to go back. And if you remember, 4 or 5 times the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh visited, and our senator also visited Bangladesh, and she might be sharing some of her insights tonight, hopefully, Senator. So you can hear from her that Bangladesh has a very delicate position on that. Even in the case of education, Senator again might share her visit experience with us. Is very difficult because Bangladesh wants them to go back, that's all. But the security situation, now I'm going into this topic in terms of saying that the security situation is deteriorating on multiple fronts. So let me start with internal fronts. So internally, the demographic has changed in that area. Is the 2 upajilas called Teknaf and Ukhia of the Cox's Bazar district, it has changed. So now, over the past 5 years, if you take a census tomorrow, you will find 1:10 is the demography, 1 being the local population and 10 are Rohingyas. So there is a fear amongst the local population that they are being overtaken by the Rohingyas. And this is really something that is happening in both 18-19 field trip I have, and of course I do monitor the situation on a daily basis. So this is one thing. Second thing is law and order situation. It is tremendously deteriorating. Within the camps in 2019, I was aware of Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, in short, ARSA's presence, but in a very hush-hush manner. I mean, people were very cautious, all these things. Now it is out in the open. If you browse news, you'll find ARSA has taken hostage, or ARSA's leader was killed, or even yesterday, last night, there was a large group of ARSA people were caught in Bangladesh camps, and is very possibly normal things we're talking about because of this illicit drug economy and other things. And this is really creating a lot of pressure on Bangladesh government per se, because they are worried about the protection of people. And it is right that you cannot visit the camps after 5 o'clock. None of us, I mean, those who come from outside, you can't. And it's a full-scale curfew outside the camps. You can't. So these are the things happening locally. And thirdly, in terms of ethnic armed organizations like Arakan Army, if you are following the news again, there are quite a bit of change since October. And it is actually, they termed October offensive. So if you know, there are 21 ethnic armed organizations were fighting for their self-determination since 1948. It's nothing new again. and there are large groups of militias, working in their external areas like Shan State, Kachin, and Arakan, Rakhine areas. So these groups have somehow become quite stronger, and they have merged. And also after this coup d'etat, is something called People Defense Force, PDF, which is composed of general Myanmar people, those who do not accept military laws, and supporters of NLD. So they are joining these groups, and the situation is changing rapidly. And over these past 3-4 months, these groups of ethnic armed organizations, or let's say coalition of these groups, have actually overturned some of the places from Tatmadaw or the Myanmar military. So Myanmar military is in back foot now, especially in the state of Rakhine, from where Rohingyas have been expelled. And last 2-3 weeks, we have seen hundreds, over 400-500 of military personnel, both from Border Security Force, have fled their posts in Myanmar, Rakhine area, and took shelter in Bangladesh. Ironically, both the victims and perpetrators are both in Bangladesh now. Of course, Bangladesh government have sent them back, but every day they are coming back. And the hostility is so intense in the border areas are very risky. 1 or 2 stray bullet and people are dying. So this is the situation as of now, just like yesterday. And we are just waiting to see how it will eventually turn out if Arakan army, which it claims to be, operating in that area, would be good enough to sort of defeat Myanmar military from that particular area. So this situation is rapidly deteriorating again, and especially in the regional side. So we all are anxious to see how it happens. And because of this instability of the security situation, nobody is even talking about repatriation, because there is nobody on the other side to talk to. Who would you talk to? So this is the security situation. And with regards to education, you might be aware that we are working to support education of adolescent female in the camps. We have run 2 pilot projects, and my big friend Estelle is here today. I just wanted to acknowledge her support. And we have run a pilot in Bhashanchar remotely. So our idea is to run some schools remotely from here, part and a sort of hybrid. So part from here and part from there. So we have finished, and we ran I would say a little long project supported by Rotary International last year. So we just submitted the final report. So we strongly believe that the children in Rohingya camps should be supported, especially the female children, those who have very least to, on the receiving side in terms of education for a longer period. So I would end by saying that the situation is really very complicated, and I don't want to end by or in an optimistic tone, but I don't know what we can do, especially our government, Canada. We have really invested a lot of energy in the past in terms of money and envoy, but moving forward, as John Packer's initial opening remarks do mention, that we could do better. But again, I don't know, given all these conflicts around, you really need to prioritize possibly at the highest end where to respond and how. With this, thank you very much. Do follow us, www.crick.org. You will have all the information that I have said, including our upcoming book. Thank you.
Thank you. So who's feeling in a state of information overload at this point? I've been asked to try to bring some of this together, and I'm going to do that by focusing on some of what I have seen and experienced because of the 2 trips that I made to Bangladesh in 2017 and 2019. 2019 included being in Cox's Bazar, and to also just really invite people here. I don't know if we have the capacity, do we, to hear from viewers online? Probably not. Okay. So I have a few prepared remarks, but before I do that, I want to just ask whether anyone has a question or a comment, anybody who's sitting with us. I know some of you have been paying very close attention to this issue, and you've had a lot of information that's been shared to this point. To make sure there's a particular question. Yes, Shana.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you. And thank all of you. I have two questions. One is to discuss what sounds like both the situation of impunity and immunity. So because of not legally being bound, Bangladesh not legally being bound, you have the immunity. But then there's also the impunity in terms of what is able to be taking place, both in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. And how this works in terms of a lack of political will. Like where is the lack of political will? Why at some point was this a situation that was galvanizing attention, and what changed? And then the other question, specifically in terms of the film, who's the audience for your film?
Let's start with that. Who's the audience?
That's a really good question. I mean, the audience for right now, I think the audience for anything that MSF is going to be saying publicly on this issue is, I mean, I'm going to say it's primarily the international community. And what does that mean? It's kind of a vague and meaningless term, right? But in the sense that it's really meant to highlight the fact that, look, after 2017, as just described, you had hundreds of thousands of people pouring into Cox's Bazar in a very short space of time. This did galvanize the international community at the time. It was a front page news story. It was such a front page news story that the political class in this country also responded. We saw Canada taking concrete actions, sending Special Envoy Ray, making a point of responding to this crisis, being seen to respond to this crisis. But I would say from our perspective, Canada did actually a lot of useful things and did a lot of stuff behind the scenes to facilitate, as Causer mentioned before, the idea of scaling up a response at that level was an immense challenge, especially in a country like Bangladesh. And it took the support of governments like Canada's.
Just try to answer the question and then we'll.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going where this, where we're at now, right? So we saw this outpouring. So now we're seeing that not exist anymore. This attention is not there, and we're seeing an investment in this, in the response to this crisis not happening. And so the audience for this film is really anybody we can get to pay attention to what's happening. I mean, the focus on this was in Cox's Bazar and in Bangladesh, but there are so many other dimensions to this crisis because there are other places where the Rohingya are going. And it's to remind people that this is an acute crisis for the people who are living through it. And there needs to be a political willingness and engagement, like you said, in order to respond. And that's really what we're trying to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think on the immunity question, we have to look at the stasis at this point of the International Criminal Court of Justice application by the Gambia, and the fact that it started to be directed to the elected government of Myanmar for alleged genocide, and there was a coup, a military coup, and technically the naming of the junta has really complicated the case. I'm going to try to take us to a place where we are understanding, or I'm really sharing some basic information of where we are at this point and where we might go. I need to say two things before I address these particular points on Rohingya and Rohingya in Bangladesh. One is that in addition to the land acknowledgement, I want to add the Parliament of Canada is situated on the unceded, unsurrendered lands of the Anishinaabe and the Algonquin First Nations. And that's where I spent a lot of my time. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. I also want to note that I do not speak for the Government of Canada, that I am an independent senator. I am not affiliated with any political party or in fact with any caucus within the Senate of Canada. So my views are my own. Right now, March of 2024, we're facing the end of Canada's strategy to respond to the Rohingya and Myanmar crises. It has not been replaced by a new strategy. It is still technically in place. And so I want to just share with you very briefly the 4 objectives that were set out in the strategy that is about to end. First was support at-risk and crisis-affected populations in Myanmar and Bangladesh, particularly Rohingya refugees, internally displaced persons, and impacted host communities. That's a lot of people, folks. Those are 3 very distinct groups, and strategies and resources would have to be customized to respond to the needs of each of these 3 articulated groups. 2, intensify efforts to advance an inclusive and sustainable peace in Myanmar. Brackets, let's bear in mind that we're dealing with a junta. We're dealing with a junta that continues to persecute Rohingya in Myanmar. And we're hearing reports now firsthand and also reports of advocates with family in Myanmar that there's forceful kidnapping, quote unquote, conscription of young Rohingya to be used by the junta, by the military. And as one of the commentators said recently, basically they're put in the front lines and they're used as cannon fodder. 3, target support to advance the restoration of democratic rule in Myanmar. Well, we've seen a glimmer, perhaps, of hope in that regard, in that there is now a national unity government. It is not recognized as the government of Myanmar, and there have been attempts, including fairly recently when my office hosted some of the representatives of the national unity government came to Parliament, and also a roundtable that Michael was able to attend in Ottawa, looking at some of the practicalities of what it might take to have a recognition of the national unity government. One of the reasons that there are numbers of people who are very concerned about this situation that are tilting toward this idea is because of the very public commitment made by those who call themselves the ministers of the national unity government, because of the inclusion of Rohingya in the cabinet of that national unity government, and because there is a commitment to inclusion and democratic practice. It's a long way from being recognized, but there's certainly active work being done to maintain and promote further discussion on this, the sort of what happens next part of exploring possible solutions. Lastly, it's the 4th point, the 4th objective, increase pressure on, quote, malign actors, quote, including through continued pursuit of accountability for human rights violations. So this relates directly to your question, Shana, about impunity and immunity. The strategy goes on to say, to achieve these objectives, Canada will increase international cooperation, including through the appointment of a special envoy on the Rohingya and Myanmar crises. Folks, if you came here tonight with an interest in taking away something that you can reach out, write to, call your MPs about, or particular ministers in the cabinet of the current government, about one very specific achievable action that Canada could take and could still take it while this strategy is about to end at the end of March. And indeed, they don't need the strategy in place to do this. The government can do this at any time. They could do it tomorrow if they wish to, appoint a new special envoy. We saw a lot of movement, and I think a lot of the reason for that was because of the individual of Bob Rae, and also because of the office given to Bob Rae with the mandate that really did generate some very substantial investment and some very substantial activity. And it states very clearly in the strategy that Canada, quote, continues to be guided by Canada's feminist international assistance policy. I do want you to note that Canada does not have a feminist foreign policy. We have a feminist international development policy. And that is, of course, a junior ministry, a lesser budget, and in many ways a much narrower mandate than if we were coming at this issue through a feminist foreign policy. And the strategy also references Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which is also a very positive reference, except we don't have one right now. Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security lapsed some time ago. We have been hearing for months that we will get an announcement of the next National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. And I think, based on conversations in which I was involved in New York at the UN last week, that indeed we are looking at the release of a new National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security in the coming weeks. And then the statement of the strategy goes on to say, Canada will support the voice, agency, and empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity, and will ensure that programming addresses the root causes of poverty and inequality. So that's the end of my quotation on the strategy. And now I want to make a couple of comments based partly on my own experiences in 2017 in Bangladesh, when Ambassador Bob Rae made his first visit to Bangladesh, to Cox's Bazar, and I was among a group of parliamentarians who met with him in Bangladesh when he returned. And then 2 years later, I was part of a delegation of feminist activists with the global network of women peace builders who went into the camps at Cox's Bazar. And that was where I met rather remarkable Dr. Fawzia Alvi, who runs the Humanity Auxilium. And tomorrow in the Senate, we will be welcoming Dr. Yipeng Ji, who has just returned from Gaza, actually, from one of the Humanity Auxilium medical team visits there. But at the time, Dr. Alvi was there from Calgary and very focused on what was happening to women and children in particular in the camps. And I also have maintained communications with two young feminist activists, YY Nu, who is based in California now, but still has Rohingya family members in Myanmar, and founded the Women Peace Network, and Yasminullah here in Canada, now in British Columbia, who's taking a very interesting angle on addressing some of these issues around Rohingya by working on the ASEAN focus, where we have, it's part of Canada's relatively new Indo-Pacific strategy, and we have all the major nations of that Asian area of the world that in fact are members of this multilateral sub-regional network. Not going to say that Yasmin is reporting enormous success with this, but I think you could get the feeling from all of us tonight that those of us focused and trying to work on actually bringing about positive differences for Rohingya in Bangladesh and Myanmar are looking for new approaches, are looking not just for what we have been doing, but really, what are we going to do to respond to this shift in declining resources and declining attention? One of the groups I want to bring to your attention, because I think in addressing the immunity question and having to look at what happened to the International Court of Justice case, we need to also look at who were the voices that were presented in that case. And if there's a newer version of this kind of action, we really need to, I think, not just ask the question, but be very firm about the fact that Rohingya voices have to be part of any kind of international, multilateral action, be it within the international legal system, or be it within the United Nations or some of the regional intergovernmental organizations. And one of the groups that I think we need to look at, in addition to the two feminist activists I've already mentioned, is Shanti Mohila, which is an organization that's been founded inside the camps by Rohingya women. It is supported by young activists, Rohingya activists like Waiwainu and Yasminullah. And they actually made a submission to the ICJ case. They are determined to have their own voices, to take their own actions, and to maintain their own agency. The last practical point I want to make is that some of us on Parliament Hill have been responding to try to provide internship opportunities for Rohingya activists that have found themselves in Canada as a way of trying to increase the knowledge of the Canadian system and to support more strongly the agency and the effectiveness of this kind of advocacy. So you've been very patient in listening to all of us. I hope this is helpful, and I'm going to turn this back to you, I think. Shana?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Hi. I know that there is a potential to show another film, but I'm gonna take a vote.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How many, this is a lot, like a lot. And I know when I left the academy in June, although somebody has gotten me back in for a little bit. But I know when I was teaching human rights, one of the things that I would often say is, I teach human rights, I don't just teach human rights violations. Because if we only speak about human rights violations, it becomes very, very easy to get overwhelmed, to lose our empathy, to lose our hope, to check out. And that can become very easy. So I recognize that. And for that reason, I actually want to try and pull some things that I did here, where we can remember in the film and in what you were speaking, actually what everyone was speaking about, is the interdependence of human rights, the indivisibility of human rights. We're talking about health. We're talking about intimate partner violence. We're talking about food. We're talking about education. We're talking about safety. We're talking about the fact that desperate people will do desperate things, right? So if we can remember the systemic aspect of it, but also the interdependence of it, then I think it actually in some ways reminds us of the humanness of this, as opposed to just the lack of humanity or overwhelming problem that needs to be solved by somebody. But whoops, we have other wars too. We have other genocides too. We have other unresolved issues too, and that can become overwhelming. So I just wanted to try and tie that there. There is this short animated film. There are also people in the audience. Do you mind if we take a vote? How does democracy sound? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always end well, but we can try. There's a short, about 5-minute film that's an animated film. It is pretty heart-wrenching. It is also very compelling. Would you like to watch that now, or would you like to have discussion first? Or, and then have the link sent perhaps. Yeah, it's a short animated film. Yeah. Watch the show. Watch the show.
Well, I can explain here. Maybe I should. Here, can I just introduce it quickly?
No.
Okay. So this it's only 5 minutes long. It's an animated short that's MSF sponsored and helped sort of lead the ideation on. But it is actually the story. It's sort of a dramatized version of a story of a Rohingya refugee who worked for MSF in Malaysia and was part of a group who, with the circumstances for many Rohingya, both in Cox's Bazar and in Rakhine State in Myanmar, who set out and take absolutely desperate journeys in search of safety. Many of these are by sea, many of them are across the Andaman Sea to Malaysia, which is where this particular inspiration for this video came from, his story, but also to other areas, parts of Southeast Asia, where again, as stateless refugees, the Rohingya are met with quite difficult circumstances there as well. But the journeys themselves can be quite harrowing. So that's the starting point for this short video.
곧 아들로서네. 그들이 걸어가서 의 양팀의 리자비 그들이 멀리 왔다.
And maybe one just last thing to say that, so there's, as it said again, many people have been making this, attempts at these journeys. We've seen this for the past several years, for quite some time, but this is happening now too. So we read there was recently some arrival of boats of Rohingya refugees who arrived from Cox's Bazar into Indonesia, and there's been a significant pushback. One of the boats successfully landed, other boats have been pushed away. We've seen a big push, local sentiment is very much against the idea of the Rohingya being allowed to land, being able to stay. Again, Indonesia is another country that has not signed the 1951 Refugee Convention. So at the end of some of these very harrowing, difficult journeys, people are arriving in places where they are actually being pushed back again. And even those who stay then have to navigate a very difficult environment in which they're not welcome, not legal, not recognized, and then get pushed into the shadows of society because they're not actually recognized again as stateless people. So it's quite difficult. Anyway, I don't know if you want to reconvene over here.
And again, I mentioned earlier that desperate people do desperate things, but I think I need to qualify that statement that people who are made desperate, right? Like people for whom desperation is created, you will do desperate things. Questions, comments? Senator McCutcheon said, like, here's something concrete that we could do. Yes, please. Who are you?
Rob Chase, I'm at the University of Manitoba, and my colleague here who recently visited Cox's Bazar. Curious about the Rohingya community in Winnipeg. Mentioned 1,000 in Canada, and is there organization quite in the have a voice or, I would imagine it's very difficult to start fresh, but I wonder about the development aspects of the newcomers to Canada and their families back in Cox's Bazar.
Should I respond? Okay.
This is something you might know. It's hard to.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, to the best of my knowledge, we have two families of Rohingyas still living in Winnipeg. And I'm in touch with one directly. But the most active person left Winnipeg to Waterloo. And you might know that Waterloo is the only place in Canada where over 250 Rohingyas and families live since they came in 2008 under government-sponsored program. So this is the only time Canadian government sponsored Rohingyas, and that happened in 2008 and 9. So since then, the community grew out of Waterloo. So, so the person I'm referring to, he was here, then he moved to Waterloo. And in terms of, so Yasminullah, I also know her very well. She lives in West Coast. But in Waterloo, there is a group of Rohingyas. They organize themselves very well. They call themselves CRDI, Rohingya Development Initiative, Canadian Rohingya Development Initiative, and its leader's name is Mr. Saifullah, a young fellow with who I have done a couple of activities together, and is very very well known to Honorable Bob Ray as well. So Saifullah runs that organization out of Waterloo, and they do regularly host events and other things, and also if new families are coming in. And particularly, if you're aware, the last known Rohingya leader in Myanmar, in Cox's Bazar camp, Mr. Mohibullah, who was brutally killed by within the camp, I think nearly 1 year ago now. So they were, they were assisting the family as well. So this is the general composition of Rohingya families in Canada. In our first book, actually, we wanted to track where the populations are globally as well. So in UK, it's a large group. In Europe, there are small groups. Malaysia, actually, the largest. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, it was a pleasure to hear you all speak. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and also for being an inspiration to me. And thank you to the Human Rights Museum for organizing this. I saw the email this morning and said, sorry, kids, gotta clear the schedule. I cannot miss this. So thanks, very happy to be here. So I'm Ashley Stewart-Tedescu, and I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. I think our paths crossed briefly. Yeah. So my research is really situated around women and children's rights. I look at international child protection and gender-based violence. And recently, my colleague and I, we were awarded a SHARP grant to look at perinatal experiences among Rohingya refugees. And so I just came back, trying to count the days, I think 17 days ago. So I was in Camp 4 in Ukiah. And so your video of the state of the situation and what you've described absolutely tracks. It seems to be just a situation that is getting so, yeah, it's awful. It's and when I was there in the camp, there were shootings. You couldn't even stay till 5 o'clock. You had to be out of there by 3:30 because the security situation is getting so desperate. But what I wanted to say is that there was also a lot of hope. The stories that the women and the children themselves share about their futures. There's so much resilience and hope. And so, while we focus on a lot of these really awful circumstances and situations, there's so much power in captivating that will, that resilience. And to your point about, Senator, about the voices being captured, that's what I think is really needed and what we're trying to do in the research, and to capture the voices of those that among the Rohingya don't necessarily have voice. And in my experience, that's women, that's girls and young children. So, if this inspires any of you or you have opportunities, I'd love to collaborate and have further discussion, because, even looking around the room tonight, I wish this room was full, but people don't know about this issue. And sure, it's, there's other, pressing issues that are more, top of the news story. But just this situation is getting so much worse. And then to hear that Canada's commitment is coming to an end makes me really, really fearful. So, but I don't want to end on a negative note either. I think there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of optimism, but, if we could mobilize together, I think that would be really wonderful. So thanks again.
Thank you. And it's good to put a face to an email.
Hi, my name's Estelle Lamoureux, and I'm an educator, many years at it, as you can tell. But I wanted to ask Councillor about the project, the education project. And because tagging on what you just said about giving hope, the children there, I could just, they're powerless. Everybody's powerless there. But hope is the only thing sometimes we can give them. Now, I know we collaborated a little bit on that project. Now, I also know that that would fit into global issues courses at the high school level here. And it would fit in very easily. And I'm just wondering where you're at with that project.
Thank you, Estelle. I know she's going to put me in the spotlight. Thank you, Estelle. So I basically ran the last project from Rotary International, but I'm going to share my experience working with Rotary International in that project, because as you understand, Rotary, if you work through Rotary, there's a model of funding. So you need a local sponsor of Rotary Club in Bangladesh. So in 2019-20, we have worked very hard to convince one Rotary Club in Bangladesh to become a local sponsor. It didn't go well. And with tremendous struggle, we finally ended up with one club, and we rolled the project out, and we finished it last November, submitted the final report. There is a general disinterest among Rotary clubs in Bangladesh to even listen to the idea of education in Rohingya camps. A very general standard decline. So after the project has been completed, now I am in search of another Rotary club, because without this I cannot proceed, at least from Rotary. And Rotary has a very high structural funding, because if you can't do that, you can't go there. Matching grant, what they say. So my club is very forthright, very welcoming. They always supported. I'm talking about Winnipeg Rotary Club, but I'm really unable to convince Bangladesh host club as of today. And second point is, but we are working closely with Children on the Edge. It's a British charity based out of Bangkok. So they have mobilized substantial fund for this project, and we are working with them. We have hold them still that please give us some time so that we can go. But eventually, if we cannot go through Rotary International, we'll do it directly with the Children on the Edge. And especially what Estelle is asking, because I got her involved, and in the it's an innovative project, because there is such a huge need of education in the camp, especially for the female adolescents. And our definition of adolescence actually starts from 12. So 12 to 16 is our way of looking at. So we don't have any sponsorship from Canada. And I'll just close by saying that actually we need a lot of support and help from anybody interested in this country to support us because it is very unlikely we can get through Rotary International. And this is something possibly your research might also unveil. There's a general disinterest in Bangladesh if you want to do anything about Rohingya from outside. Thank you.
Has CC UNESCO been approached?
UNESCO has no programs. We have approached to all of them, UNESCO and other things. Nobody has any direct, and these are basically the funding is always either government to government, G2G, or G2 to international organizations. They don't talk with smaller organizations like us, and they even don't reply your email. Yeah.
Obviously, you talked to Gary.
I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about one of the still operating projects in Cox's Bazar, in the camps, in 3 of the numbered camps, as was referenced by the professor, and they're in 3 different of the numbered camps. And it's actually Canadian funding through Peace Ops and in Global Affairs Canada. And it is a project that teams up, that keeps the focus on adolescent girls, young women, many of whom are mothers, including many who are mothers as a result of rape. And there are young Bangladeshi women living close to or in Cox's Bazar who are trained in the basics of communication and basic education, basically alphabet, basic writing and reading. And the Global Network of Women Peace Builders facilitates their going into the camps and sitting in classrooms, makeshift classrooms identical to what you saw in the film, and having young woman to young woman learning sessions. And one of the most interesting developments from this is actually the tremendous backlash that the young Bangladeshi women have experienced within their own communities from their own people, being very critical of many of them for having anything to do with Rohingya. And so, although it wasn't initially planned, there's quite a bit of attention paid now to how to support the Bangladeshi young women and how to communicate within their communities, in addition to the basic education project that is the heart of the funding.
I'm conscious of time. It is time. I want to actually just point out something that we have happening right here. We have law, formal governmental structure, I know you're not representing medicine, academia, right? Again, going back to the notions of the interdependency and the indivisibility of rights. And no, we do not have a lot of people in the room, but the people that we have in the room are people who are deeply committed to recognizing that somebody's identity is not a threat to their own identity, that somebody's identity is not a threat to their own humanity, right? And what we're seeing here is the stripping away of humanity. But again, remembering the importance of education, health, of formal governmental structure, and of law, and that of community, that is where hope can come from. And that's also where work will need to be done. So I want to thank you. I encourage you to actually talk to each other. I kind of want to connect people here, this side of the room, that side of the room. And thank you very much for your time. And thank you for your time. Thank you.